I've always considered myself a regular guy, a hard-working American with a steady job, a modest house in the suburbs, and a wife I thought was my soulmate. For 10 years, Megan and I built a life together. We weren't perfect, but we had our routines, our shared dreams, and our small traditions. Every Friday night, we'd sit on the couch with takeout, watching old movies until we fell asleep. It was simple, but it was ours. We met during college, both of us young and full of ambition. Megan was studying marketing, while I was knee-deep in engineering courses. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant near campus. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest guy in the world. Over the years, we faced our share of challenges, student loans, job searches, and the stresses of everyday life, but we always faced them together. Or so I thought. Everything changed on a crisp October evening. I'd come home early from work, hoping to surprise Megan with a homemade dinner. She'd been stressed lately, working late nights at her new marketing job. I figured a quiet night together might help. Cooking wasn't exactly my forte, but I'd spent the afternoon looking up recipes and gathering ingredients. The smell of fresh herbs and garlic filled the air as I chopped vegetables and prepared the sauce. The first thing I noticed when I walked through the door was her purse on the counter. Megan always took it upstairs to our bedroom, so it was odd to see it lying there. It's funny how small things can stand out when something feels off. Shrugging it off, I went to the kitchen and started prepping. As I reached for a cutting board, I heard a faint buzz. It was her phone, tucked inside the purse. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now. But something compelled me. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a gut feeling I couldn't ignore. My hands hovered over the purse for a moment before I finally unzipped it and pulled out her phone. A text notification lit up the screen, and my heart stopped. "Chris, can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing." My stomach churned. My mind raced, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. With trembling hands, I unlocked her phone. We'd always shared passwords. Trust had never been an issue. Until now. I scrolled through the thread, my hands shaking. The messages painted a picture I didn't want to see: secret meetups, inside jokes, intimate moments I'd never shared with her. There were photos, too, selfies of them together, laughing and smiling. The latest message included a photo of the two of them at some fancy restaurant. She was wearing the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the table. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. How long had this been going on? Had she been lying to me every time she said she was working late? Questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. Memories of our life together flashed before my eyes, tainted now by the knowledge of her betrayal. I sat there for what felt like hours, the dinner forgotten on the counter. The vibrant smells that had filled the kitchen now seemed nauseating. My hands were still shaking when I finally stood up. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, hoping it would calm my nerves, but the bitterness only added to the sour taste in my mouth. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I saw her with him. I replayed every moment in my head, trying to figure out how I'd missed the signs. The late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the distant look in her eyes when I tried to talk to her. It all seemed so obvious now, but at the time, I'd convinced myself she was just tired or stressed. The next morning I woke up, if you could call it waking up when you haven't slept, with a sense of dread heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I knew I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. But confronting her meant shattering the illusion of the life we built. It meant facing the reality that the woman I loved might not be the person I thought she was. I spent the day in a fog, going through the motions at work but barely functioning. My coworkers noticed, but I brushed off their concerns with half-hearted excuses. All I could think about was the text, the photo, the betrayal. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I needed answers, no matter how much they hurt. When Megan walked through the door that evening, she greeted me with her usual cheerful, "Hey, babe!" But her smile faltered when she saw my face. I held her phone up, the incriminating messages still on the screen. Her expression shifted from confusion to panic in an instant, and I knew, there was no going back. Megan's face strained of color, her eyes darting between the phone in my hand and the anger etched across my face. For a moment she seemed frozen, her lips parting as if to speak but no words coming out. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, until finally she stammered. I can explain. I'd always imagined that if something like this ever happened, I'd explode with rage. But in that moment, I felt eerily calm, like I was standing outside my own body, watching the scene unfold. Explain? I said, my voice low and steady. Go ahead, Megan. Explain this. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, the messages still open for her to see. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the edge of the couch. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and started to cry. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered between sobs. It was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. A mistake? I repeated, my voice rising. A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash. A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt. This is not a mistake, Megan. This is a choice. Repeated choices. 4 months. Her shoulders shook as her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I'd spent years being her rock, her safe place, but now it felt like I didn't even know who she was. The woman sitting in front of me was a stranger, and every tear she shed felt like an insult. Who is he? I demanded. How long has this been going on? She wiped her eyes and looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. His name is Chris. He works with me. It started a few months ago, but I swear, it didn't mean anything. I laughed bitterly. Didn't mean anything? You don't sneak around, lie to your husband, and send messages like that to someone who doesn't mean anything. Don't insult me by pretending this was some harmless fling. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work, and I don't know. I made a mistake. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I'd been working long hours, it was true, but it was for us, to pay off the mortgage, to save for the future we'd planned together. And while I was pouring myself into providing for us, she was finding comfort in someone else's arms. So this is my fault now? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Because I was working to give us a better life, you decided to cheat on me? No, she said quickly. That's not what I meant. I just felt forgotten. Chris made me feel seen. Like I mattered. Her words stung, each one cutting deeper than the last. I'd sacrificed so much for our life together, and now she was telling me it wasn't enough. That I wasn't enough. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on me, suffocating and inescapable. What do you want me to say, Megan? I asked, my voice breaking. That I understand? That I forgive you? Because I don't. I can't. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. The thought of her touch, the same touch she'd given to someone else, made my skin crawl. She flinched at my reaction, her eyes filling with fresh tears. I'll end it, she said quickly. I'll cut him out of my life completely. Please just don't give up on us. We can fix this. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could go back to the way things were, that this was just a horrible mistake we could somehow overcome. But deep down, I knew the truth. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was gone, shattered into pieces that could never be put back together. I need time, I said finally. Time to think. To figure out what this means for us. She nodded, her face crumpling as she began to cry again. I stood and walked out of the room, unable to bear the sight of her tears any longer. I needed space, a chance to clear my head and process everything that had happened. I grabbed my jacket and keys, stepping out into the cool night air. The silence of the neighborhood was a stark contrast to the chaos raging inside me. As I drove aimlessly through the streets, memories of our life together flooded my mind. The day we moved into our house, painting the walls and arguing over furniture. The nights we stayed up late, dreaming about the future. The mornings we spent wrapped in each other's arms, not wanting to face the day. Each memory felt tainted now, overshadowed by her betrayal. I ended up at a park we used to visit when we were dating. The bench where we'd sat and talked for hours was still there, a quiet reminder of what we once had. I sat down, my head in my hands, and let the tears come. For the first time since discovering the truth, I allowed myself to grieve. To mourn the loss of the woman I thought I knew, the life I thought we had. The hours passed in a blur, and by the time I returned home, the house was dark. Megan was asleep on the couch, her face still streaked with tears. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment. Despite everything, a part of me still loved her. But love wasn't enough to erase the pain, the betrayal, the doubt. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Whether we could rebuild what was broken or if this was the end of our story, only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The morning after the confrontation felt like waking up in a foreign world. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that screams at you. Megan wasn't on the couch anymore. Her absence hung in the air, a reminder of the storm we were both caught in. I trudged into the kitchen to make coffee, each step heavy with the weight of the previous night. The coffee pot gurgled as it brewed, the familiar sound oddly comforting. But as I sipped my first cup, my mind returned to the questions that had haunted me all night. How could she betray me like this? Was there something I missed, some warning sign I had ignored? And more pressing, could we ever find our way back? Megan emerged from the bedroom, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes puffy and red. For a moment neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the tension of everything left unresolved. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond immediately, staring down into my coffee as if it held the answers I needed. Finally I said, "Morning." She hesitated, then took a seat across from me at the table. "I know I'm the last person you want to talk to right now," she began. "But I think we need to start figuring out where we go from here." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. Figuring out where to go from here felt impossible when I didn't even know where we stood. "Have you spoken to him?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched at the question but answered quickly. "No. I deleted his number last night. Blocked him. I want nothing to do with him anymore." Her words should have brought me some relief, but they didn't. It was too little, too late. The damage was already done. "Why did it take getting caught for you to end it?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "If it didn't mean anything, why not stop before it came to this?" Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she looked away, ashamed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I wasn't thinking. I wasn't myself. It was like I was in this bubble, and I convinced myself it wasn't hurting anyone. But I know now how wrong I was. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back." Her honesty, while painful, was at least a step forward. But it wasn't enough to mend the rift between us. "I need to understand something, Megan," I said. "Were you unhappy with me? With us?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions of life. Chris made me feel alive again. But it wasn't real. It was a fantasy, and I see that now." Her explanation didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made me feel worse. I thought we were building a life together, that we were partners in every sense of the word. But now I realized there was a part of her life I'd never been privy to, a part that led her down this path of betrayal. The day passed in a haze of awkward silences and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. We didn't know how to act around each other anymore. Every interaction felt strained, every word laced with unspoken accusations and apologies. By the time evening rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head and escape the suffocating tension. "I'm going for a drive," I said abruptly, grabbing my keys. Megan looked up from the couch, worry etched across her face. "Do you want me to come with you?" she asked hesitantly. "No," I said, more harshly than I intended. "I need to be alone." I left without another word, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I drove aimlessly, the hum of the engine and the blur of passing streetlights providing a strange sense of solace. I ended up at a bar I hadn't been to in years, a small, dimly lit place that used to be a regular hangout for me and my friends before life got in the way. The bartender gave me a nod of recognition as I slid onto a stool. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. "What'll it be?" "Whiskey," I replied. "Neat." He poured the drink and set it in front of me, and I downed it in one gulp, relishing the burn as it slid down my throat. I motioned for another, and he obliged without comment. For a while, I just sat there, nursing my drink and staring at the rows of bottles lined up behind the bar. The noise of the other patrons faded into the background as I lost myself in my thoughts. I didn't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from Megan, *, please come home. I'm worried about you. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to go home, to try and work things out. But another part of me, a darker part, wanted to stay right where I was, drowning my sorrows in whiskey and forgetting, even if only for a little while. In the end, I paid my tab and left the bar, though not to go home. Instead, I drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I checked in, the clerk barely glancing up from his phone as he handed me the key. The room was small and shabby, but it was exactly what I needed, a place to be alone, away from the suffocating weight of my broken marriage. As I lay on the lumpy mattress, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I felt the full weight of everything crashing down on me. Megan's betrayal, the shattered trust, the uncertain future, it all felt like too much to bear. For the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know what I wanted or where I was going. All I knew was that the life I'd built, the life I'd fought so hard for, was gone. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The drive back to our house was surreal. I replayed the confrontation at Chris's house over and over in my mind. Every detail, every word Megan and Chris exchanged felt like a knife turning in my gut. The woman I had trusted implicitly had betrayed me, and I was still grappling with what that meant for us. When I walked into the house, Megan was sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I entered, her eyes swollen from crying. "We need to talk," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She nodded, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. "I know," she whispered. I sat down across from her, keeping the coffee table between us like a barrier. "How long?" I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. She swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to her lap. "It started about 3 months ago," she admitted. "But it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake." "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to lock the door, Megan. What you did was a choice, a deliberate choice to lie to me, to betray me." She flinched at my words, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I love you, and I want to fix this." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and devoid of humor. "Love? Is that what you call it? Sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face?" She reached out as if to touch me, but I recoiled, the thought of her touch repulsive in that moment. "Please," she begged. "Let me explain." "Explain?" I snapped. "Explain what, Megan? That you decided our marriage wasn't enough for you? That you needed him to feel whole?" Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. But it was quickly extinguished by the anger and pain that consumed me. "I trusted you," I said, my voice cracking. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" She shook her head, her words coming out in a desperate rush. It wasn't about you, I swear. I was feeling lost, and Chris, he was just there. It was stupid and selfish, and I hate myself for it. Her words only deepened the wound. Do you think that makes it better? I asked. That you threw away our life together because you were feeling lost? She had no answer, her silence speaking volumes. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to process the storm of emotions raging inside me. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally. The woman I married would never have done this. I'm still that woman, she insisted, standing up as well. I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still me. And I still love you. I shook my head, the weight of her words too much to bear. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this, I said. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. The conversation continued late into the night, both of us saying things we could never take back. By the time I finally went to bed, leaving Megan crying on the couch, I felt emotionally drained. Sleep didn't come easily, my mind replaying every argument, every accusation, every tear. The next morning, Megan approached me cautiously, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice hoarse. I've been thinking, she said. Maybe we should see a counselor. Someone who can help us work through this. I stared at her, my emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to try, to salvage what we had built together. But another part of me, the part still raw and bleeding, wanted to walk away and never look back. I don't know, I said finally. I need time to think. She nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and despair. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Over the next few days, we lived like strangers sharing the same space. Conversations were brief and stilted, the air between us heavy with unspoken words. Megan tried to reach out, cooking my favorite meals, leaving notes apologizing for what she had done. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Every gesture felt like a band-aid on a wound too deep to heal. One evening, as I sat in my car outside a bar, contemplating whether to go in or just drive around aimlessly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Megan. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. It read. But I want you to know that I'm not giving up on us. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and longing. I wanted to believe her, to believe that we could find a way back to each other. But the pain was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. As I sat there, the realization hit me. I couldn't keep living in limbo. I needed to make a decision, for both of our sakes. Either we would find a way to move forward together, or we would go our separate ways. But one thing was certain, something had to change. When I returned home that night, Megan was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Can we talk? She asked softly. I nodded, sitting down across from her. We need to figure out where we go from here, I said. Because I can't keep living like this. She nodded, her expression resolute. I'll do whatever it takes, she said. Just tell me what I need to do. As we talked late into the night, laying everything bare, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It was fragile and tentative, but it was there. But just as the conversation began to feel constructive, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at it, seeing a message from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The text read, Megan isn't telling you the whole truth. Call me if you want to know who Chris really is. Attached was a picture of Chris with a group of men I didn't recognize, standing in what looked like a corporate office. My heart sank. Who had sent this? And what did they mean by who Chris really is? The fragile hope I'd just begun to feel was quickly replaced by a sense of foreboding. When Megan noticed my expression, she asked, What is it? I hesitated, then locked my phone. Nothing, I said. We'll talk more tomorrow. As I turned in for the night, my mind raced. Something told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever secrets Megan had been keeping, it seemed they weren't the only ones. And now, I had to decide whether to confront her or follow this new lead and uncover the truth myself. The message on my phone haunted me all night. I tossed and turned, the cryptic words and the photo of Chris gnawing at my mind. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to know the full story. I called the number attached to the text, my heart pounding as the line rang. A gruff voice answered. "I was wondering when you'd call." "Who is this?" I demanded. "And what do you know about Chris?" "My name's Andrew," the man said. "And let's just say Chris and I go way back. He's not who you think he is. If you want the truth, meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street at noon." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The hours crawled by as I waited for the meeting, my mind racing with possibilities. When noon finally came, I found myself sitting across from a man who looked like he'd seen his fair share of trouble. His sharp eyes studied me as he slid a folder across the table. "Everything you need to know is in there," Andrew said. "Chris has a history of targeting people like you, wealthy, successful men with something to lose. He's a con artist, and your wife is just his latest mark." I opened the folder, my stomach twisting as I scanned the documents inside. Bank records, emails, and photos painted a damning picture. Chris had been involved in multiple schemes, using charm and manipulation to insert himself into people's lives and exploit their vulnerabilities. He had left a trail of broken marriages and financial ruin in his wake. "This can't be real," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's real," Andrew said. "And if you don't act fast, you'll be his next victim." As I drove home, my mind reeled with the implications of what I had learned. Megan's betrayal was devastating, but now it seemed she had been a pawn in Chris's game. I needed answers, and I needed them now. When I confronted Megan that evening, she was taken aback by the folder I slammed onto the table. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You tell me," I said. "Did you know Chris was a con artist? That he's been using you to get to me?" Her eyes widened as she flipped through the documents, her hands shaking. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He told me he cared about me, that he understood me in a way you never could." "And you believed him?" I snapped. "You let him destroy our marriage because you felt understood?" Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. "I was lost, okay? I didn't know who I was anymore. He made me feel alive, but I never thought he was doing this to hurt you." Her words felt hollow, but the pain in her eyes was genuine. "We need to stop him," I said. "If he's done this to others, he won't stop until someone holds him accountable." Over the next few days, Megan and I worked together to gather evidence against Chris. It was a strange and uneasy alliance, but we both knew it was necessary. With Andrew's help, we compiled enough information to take to the authorities. When Chris was finally arrested, the sense of relief was overwhelming. But as the dust settled, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Megan and I had been through hell, and our marriage was in tatters. The trust we had once shared was gone, replaced by a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Megan broke the silence. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, "but I want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't change what happened. I don't know if we can ever get back to where we were." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I understand. And if you need to walk away, I won't stop you. But I hope you'll give us a chance to rebuild, even if it takes years." I didn't have an answer for her that night. The scars of her betrayal and Chris's deception ran deep, and I wasn't sure if they would ever fully heal. But as I looked at the woman I had once loved with all my heart, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was a glimmer of hope. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy, and it might not even be possible. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a choice. Whether we stayed together or went our separate ways, I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't let this define me. I would find a way to move forward, no matter what. And so, with the past behind me and an uncertain future ahead, I took the first step toward reclaiming my life. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.